I actually want to kind of come full circle, which is find purpose in the journey. And you tell another story about Luke, which is where we started in the know God element. And Jeff actually, who's been a co-author with you from time to time, which we'll talk about in a second. But I give Jeff a lot of credit for this the Cinderella Man analogy, because I love the movie and the finding purpose in the journey. You told the story about helping Luke learn to use his left.
Yeah, this is essentially a reference to a movie with Russell Crowe and Renee Zellweger from quite a few years ago. But it's a true story. And in order to understand the reference, let me just explain. It's about this boxer from before the Great Depression, James Braddock. And he had been this incredibly sort of popular, victorious champion boxer. And he had this fantastic right hook. Nobody could survive. He always could, he always could win because he had this right hook. He wasn't as good with his left, but well, all this stuff happened and he ended up cracking his right hand. And the depression was hitting and they were suddenly in poverty. They had no way to support themselves because he couldn't fight because his right hand gotten broken. And so he's trying to find work at the docks and who's going to hire somebody who has a broken right hand, right? So he kind of hid it. But what that meant is that when he was working at the docks, he was having to do most of the work with his left hand. And unbeknownst to him, what that was doing was strengthening a part of him that had been a weakness.
Yeah.
And when he finally got the opportunity to fight again in it was one of those pity matches, here's the champion and we're going to put this old washed out, guy who's been working at the docks for years. And sort of to give him somebody that the champion can knock out without injuring somebody we care about, basically. And he wins the match because not only now is his right hand healed, but his left hand was way stronger than it ever had been. And suddenly he's this powerhouse and becomes this champion. It's an amazing story. It's true. It's a true story. And one night, Luke was just done. He was crying. I hate to say that, 17-year-old boy, he doesn't want me tell people that he was crying, but he holds up under the burdens that are caused by the epilepsy so well most of the time, but it causes learning issues. Epilepsy meds slow down processing speed. It makes it hard to follow group conversations because by the time, person number 2 responds to person number 1, his brain is still processing the first one. And so he just shuts himself down, which makes it hard to have friends, hard to make good grades because he can't necessarily concentrate on and process what the teacher is saying. Everything is harder for him. And he's a really hard worker, but sometimes it just is overwhelming. So he just broke down one night and he was like, why is this happening to me? And it broke my heart. And Jeff stepped in and he said, do you remember that movie that we saw recently, Cinderella Man? And Luke said, yeah. And he said, this hard, bad thing happened to him. He broke his right hand. Everything was hard. He had to do everything with his left hand. And it was a really hard period for him. But God used that to completely change his life and make him into a different person in many ways. He went through this really hard period. It changed his character, and made him a more attentive family man, a great husband, a great dad, and eventually a great champion. And Luke, I know you are so burdened by this epilepsy and how hard it makes everything for you. You have to be home working on your homework for hours while other kids are playing outside.
Having fun, right? Having
fun. And yet God is using this. It's the equivalent of he's strengthening your left hand. This is something that God has allowed to happen in your life, and it's building your character. And look, for example, at the incredible work ethic you've built up, because you have to. You have no choice. You know, if everybody else has to work for half an hour and you have to work for 2.5 hours, you're willing to do that now because you recognize that that's what's needed. That is an incredible character that God has built in you. You've become so kind to other people who are carrying burdens because you're facing things that most kids do not have to face. And that conversation completely changed Luke's outlook on what was going on. And he refers to it regularly up to this day. And it's something that all of us have to recognize, is that the element to finding peace instead of anxiety is to find purpose in the journey. What is it that God is allowing to happen? And how is God using what he's allowing to happen to strengthen your left hand, so to speak, and to build character and to build into you something that you not only need now, but you're going to need for the future. Because if we can see, like with the pandemic, what is God doing? He's doing something. This isn't random. It's not like this took him by surprise. What is he doing? Not just in the world, but in me. If we can ask God that, if we can embrace that, we're finding purpose in the journey. Suddenly, almost by definition, we're going to feel that sense of peace instead of anxiety.
Yeah. And if you don't mind, Shaunti, just because Jimmy Braddock goes on and wins, you know, the belt as the championship boxer, and Luke actually had a pretty significant win that you highlight in that devotional. Just share with our viewers, just so that they know how the story ends.
You're going to make me cry. Yeah. So this conversation about Cinderella Man was fairly early on. And, you know, he was maybe 12 in 7th, 8th grade, something like that. And he repeated 8th grade at a different school. And we're standing, I don't know if this is the story you're referring to, because I can't remember what I said in the devotional, but the thing that really hit me was we were standing in the awards ceremony at the end of the year.
That's the one. Yep.
Standing at the awards ceremony at the end of the year. And it was the same school that our daughter was at. And she was going to be a senior. And so she was a senior, excuse me. And Luke was an 8th grader, or maybe she was a junior. Anyway, she's the kind of girl who wins all the awards, who gets the straight A's, you know, who whatever, everything comes easy to her, where everything is hard for Luke. You know, he has to work at it. And so we got a notification that we needed to be at this awards ceremony, and it said, your child has won an award. Don't tell them, but just show up, you know, at the award ceremony. So we thought, oh my gosh, Morgan got some awards, some scholarships,
Morgan again,
some this, some that, you know, our daughter. And so they start with 8th grade, and all of a sudden, and they say, you know, I can't remember what the way that they phrased it, but it was the Math Achievement Award for 8th grade, Luke Feldhahn. And I just, I mean, I almost fell, I was like, wait, what? You know? And he even got a second award in language, which is one of his hardest subjects because of the way his brain works. And now, and I can tell you that further on in the story is that now he is now a sophomore, and he has taken all honors math, science, and STEM classes, and has been getting straight A's.
Yeah.
And it's just, I would have said, would have been impossible 4 years ago. And yet that recognition that God was doing something in this.
That's right.
Is really what gave him the strength. And I really, and that is for everybody listening to this, we are going through a horrible time. We are going through an amazing time. We are going through a time that there's a lot of purpose in the journey. And it doesn't mean it's not hard, because by definition it is. I mean, we've lost most of our income, like I said,
Yeah.
right? Like, how are we going to provide for the family in, in a few months? I don't know. God does, though.
Yeah.
And, are we going to be still public speakers? I don't know. Are there going to be events for the next couple of years?
Yeah.
I don't know. Right. And yet God uses that stuff. And so if we can lean into that, as hard as it is, suddenly that's when 5 years from now, we look back and we go, look, it was hard. Maybe somebody was infected by the virus. Maybe you lost a loved one. I mean, there could be really hard things that we have to walk through. And yet there is purpose. And we will look back and go, okay, I see what God was doing.